I'm Ryan Brown, Director of the Masters Academy of Art. This is just another video to show how to set up a site size figure drawing. The reason we use site size and figure drawing, we don't use it through the whole program. I'm also going to be talking to some new students here. We don't use it through the entire program, but we start with it because it makes it a little bit easier to work through some of the early proportional issues. It's also easier for me to communicate with you guys when I say something needs to, be adjusted by this much. We can be far more accurate when we're describing how to adjust your proportional issues or how we look at angles or whatever, how to break down the drawing. It makes it a little bit easier to digest early in the program. And then, there will be plenty of projects you do after that we don't use site size. So you'll also be learning comparative. Site size is comparative drawing. It just has the addition of a few extra tools that you can use to check yourself. So the way that you would set it up, if you're right-handed, you set your drawing up right on the edge of the board here. We don't have a paper, but I'll just be drawing straight on the board to describe this. I'm going to try to do it so that from the video it'll make sense site size, so I'll be back and forth to do that. But the first things that you want to think about when you're setting this up is your proximity to the board and the board's proximity to the model. If you were to want to do a life-size painting, then you would put the easel right next to the model so that those measurements were exactly that. We're not doing that, so our board is maybe 15 feet from the model, and in order to get a larger drawing, if I'm standing up here and looking at her at this distance, the top of her head, I just use the board as my plumb line, and so I figure everything is smashed into 2 dimensions, right? So my position on the board, the top of her head is actually touching the board right here, and the bottom of her feet is right here. But if I were to step back, I don't know if the video can see this, the top of her head moves to there, and the bottom of her feet moves to there. So there's a large difference, and so the further back I get, the larger the drawing gets. So we want to make sure that we're filling up. You can see all the drawings over here. You're filling up the drawing or the paper. You want to leave, maybe an inch, the top or bottom, but fill it up. The larger it is, the easier it's going to be for you to make adjustments. When you get to a head that's like an inch or even smaller, every tiny adjustment, it has a major impact. So you want to make sure you're getting as much out of that paper as you can. So just to look at how this lines up, let me try to memorize that. If I were on a video, let me just make a mark where the top of the head would be. If you're imagining, no, that's a little high. If you're imagining from the video's standpoint, again, smushing everything into 2 dimensions, that's close. Make a mark at the top of the head. Might be a little bit high still. So you're choosing a fixed point, and you're going to mark that on the ground, just like Andy's done. Just tape around your feet so you can just come right back to it. You're not trying to figure out exactly where you're at. And the reason that's important is because you're going to be basing your measurements off of that initially. So it's a little high on her feet. What you'll notice is, and I'll have you guys do this, as you're standing there, if you lift your chin up or down, that's going to change the marks relative to the model. If you lean forward or back, or if you're half a step forward, it's going to change your marks. So every time you make a mark. You can do it, you're obviously doing it from the very topmost point first, top of the head, and the bottom of the feet. That's your overall proportion. You're not gonna extend beyond that. And then you can start making other marks. You can say, here's the bottom of the chin. I'm not sure if this is working out on the video, but just for the sake of getting through this, here's the bottom of the chin. Here's maybe where her elbow is. Here's the navel. Here's the pubic symphysis. Here's the knee, whatever. You can make all of these little marks on the edge of the board, and then you want to pull those over. There's your top and bottom line. Here's all of your other marks. You can pull those over. And then when you start drawing, you can say, okay, here's the head, the angle, that's terrible. The angle of the head to the elbow is here. Again, I'm not sure if this is measuring perfectly on the video, but just for the sake of getting through this, and you can go from the elbow through the hand over to the, you can take that break. This head to the shoulder, shoulder down through the hip, side of the figure down through the thigh, down to the feet. Place the feet. You get the basic idea of we're starting from the envelope with the outer large angles to tie everything together. We want to see how the shoulders relate to the hips, how the hips relate to the feet. Typically on a contrapposto pose like this, the rule is that, and she's leaning on something, so this probably won't match exactly, but typically in a contrapposto pose where the weight is distributed to one side, the pit of the neck lines up with the instep of the weight-bearing foot. And that's a great thing to know generally because you can get the balance so that your neck isn't over here and your foot's over here and it feels like it's leaning. You can get that balance. But we start with these large angles and shapes, and then we just move on from there. These are just a few examples of kind of what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm going through this really quickly, but I'm not gonna take the time to like do a whole laid out drawing, but I do have some examples. So you want to look for, can you see that? Does that show up?
Come in a little closer right there. Move this way just a little bit.
So you want to look for the major thrusts, the major angles that tie the figure together. So from the back of the head down through the back of the shoulder blade is this major angle. But you want to look for parallels. Parallels are going to like really show, kind of tie the figure together, or things that are close to parallel. So this major angle between the back of the hip and the front of the face, it's kind of an abstract way of tying that together, but it mimics so closely that angle as well. And then down from the front of the thigh through the inside of the ankle is also an angle. All of those things create these major thrusts that connect the figure. And then the opposing from the back here and basically from the armpit through the front of the thigh. Those are opposing angles that tie together really nicely. So this is a good lay-in. You can see some of the remnants lines from the back of the head to the shoulder blade, from there down through the back of the heel. That would be the envelope that kind of encompasses or envelops the entirety of the figure. And then you just start carving in from there as if it were like a big block of marble. When you come on the interior of the figure, you want to separate light and dark. So we go by what we call the terminating line, which is the main separation of light and dark. And the terminating line, if you think about simply a sphere, you have the highlight, and then you have, if the light's coming from this direction, you have at some point that light is going to turn away from the light source enough where it loses any percent of direct light, and that would be the terminating line here. You have obviously some reflected light, you have cast shadow, but the terminating line is along with the contour, the terminating line, those two elements are the most important elements in defining form, because the contour is going to reveal the edge of the form as it turns away from your eye, and the terminating line is going to is almost like topographically reveal the volume of the form based on how the light is hitting the form. So so this is another good example of how to start. This is a really subtle drawing. I mean, this is maybe 20 minutes in, but you can see just the focus on large straight angles. You can see the focus on just getting the basic proportion, the balance, the rhythm, how the figure ties together. The character of the model is already there. We're not getting overly concerned about too much detail initially. We want to think much more broadly and get the big picture and fit the small pieces into the larger pieces. So that's a really good start. You develop into that something that looks like that. You can see there is a line that separates light and dark, and the basic character of the model is there, but things are simplified. I don't have toes, I don't have an iris and then a little shine on the eye, and I don't have any of the specific stuff. And then I fill in the drawing with, or the entirety of the shadow shape I fill in with one flat value, because it's not about value in those early stages, it's about shape, it's about proportion. I'm wanting to, when I fill that mass in, it's really to check if my light shape and dark shapes are harmonizing and working proportionally and gesturally. And then from there, I refine the shape. I get more of a particular character to all the shapes. I start thinking more about anatomy and volume and whatever. These are our Tuesday, Thursday night. These are like the 2-hour drawings that we would do. These are what they look like. But we start the long pose, a little bit larger, exactly the same way. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So one thing I forgot to say is the reason we line it up on the edge is because the edge of the board gives us that basically a plumb line. So when you're pulling these lines across, and that gives you the top and bottom, and that's the first lines on any side-size drawing are your top, your bottom, and your plumb line. So you'll decide. I would probably use the pit of the neck as a reference point for where I'd put my plumb line on her. For you, over on her side, maybe you choose a slightly different reference point, but you want to kind of go back to that. Because she's leaning on something, she has 3 points then of contact, so she's probably going to be a little bit more stable. If she was like holding a staff or something, there'd be a little bit more sway, so you'd want to watch that. Because where the pit of the neck may shift slightly depending on her stance, but she should be a little bit more stable. Some people will put a clip here with a little line that drops, and you can use that as your plumb line. Otherwise, if you're using the edge of the board, obviously you're blocking half of the figure, so when you need to reveal that, you'd lean. But the horizontal lines that you'll pull across for, say, height of her head, navel, any sort of reference point, it gives you sort of a reference on that horizontal axis. But so typically, beginning students, if they make mistakes, it's with the width, because it's harder to measure vertically. But that's where you can say, my main plumb line is pit of the neck to instep of the foot, wherever it lines up. But I can mentally run as many plumb lines as I want. I could say, okay, how does the armpit match up with the knee or whatever? And so I can start to get some of these alignments recorded a little bit more accurately earlier if I'm looking at that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And again, I just use the edge of my board for that, but you can do that however you want. So top line first, bottom line. Choose a plumb line that's slightly to the left. You want to offset the drawing slightly to the edge, so you don't have this big gap that you have to look past from the original to your drawing. And just make sure that if I put my plumb line here, I still have room for that elbow. I don't want to cut off anything on the edge of the paper. So does that make sense? All right, good luck.